Carl Jones, Senior Lecturer in PR and Advertising at the University of Westminster.
And you're showing an idealized world, and this is what life could be like if you buy this product and bring it home.
So, Carl, welcome. Bienvenido. Croeso.
Muy bien. Thank you very much, Javier. It's a great pleasure to come to this great university. I come from North Wales and from Prestatyn, so Liverpool I know quite well growing up. That was always where we went when we had to go to hospital, was always to Liverpool. So thank you very much. I'm going to be talking about El Crayolas, an artistic research and advertising practice case study. And yeah, there we go. And I'm speaking at Liverpool John Moores University. So this project I started in 2006 and the project ended in 2013. And I'm going to take you on a chronological order of how this project grew organically. But first, I'd like to sort of explain who I am and my personal branding. So I come from an advertising background, and my tagline that I have on like my LinkedIn and my website is advertising, art, and academia. And I practice all three, and the three of them complement each other. And hopefully by the end of the lecture, you will understand why. Now, one thing is, I know I'm Welsh, but I don't sound Welsh. And that is because my family emigrated to Canada, and I was educated in advertising in Toronto. And I have been an art director and creative director from 1980 to 2012. And then from 2012 to now, I consider myself more of an academic who studies advertising. So I practice advertising from 1980 to 2012. And now as an academic, I'm studying and trying to understand advertising and advertising theory. I did a master's. I went back to Canada in 2010. I was vice president of Grey Canada. And I did my master's at Ryerson and York Universities in Toronto on racism and classism in Mexican advertising, because when I was in Mexico, I could never understand when white people are 10% of the population, why they would be in 80 or 90% of the advertising. It just didn't make sense to me, because I come from a background where you put what you see on the street into your advertising. And that is why in Britain you have such diverse commercials, and why you have Sainsbury's right now in Britain featuring a black family, because you reflect what you see. Whereas in Mexico, they create this sort of myth and glorify, they're very Eurocentric, and Mexican advertising seems to sort of glorify the idea of being European. And I guess that's because of the conquest of the Spanish. And for my PhD, which I'm doing right now in London at the Royal College of Art, I'm looking at decolonizing advertising. So my master's was looking at why racism and classism happen in Mexican advertising and help me understand it. And now for my doctorado or my PhD, I'm looking at decolonizing and making changes to Mexican advertising so that it will not be so racist and classist in its creative output. So in 1993, I moved to Mexico City to work as a creative director for Grey Mexico. And then from 1995 to 2005, I was vice president, creative director of BBDO Mexico. And Bayer was my largest client. And, you know, I had moved to Mexico in 93, and I was very interested in Mexican culture and what I saw and the things that I noticed. And I started just sort of thinking about what I was observing. And well, like I said earlier, this story, this narrative I'm going to tell you about El Crayolas is of how my three interests of advertising, art, and academia came together. And in Mexico, I went to markets, and I would go. There was a great exhibition at a museum in Mexico City about ex votos. And ex votos are small paintings around this big, and they're painted on metal, and they are sort of prayers. So this ex voto is of a guy who slept on railway tracks because he was drunk, obviously, because you can see the little bottle there. And his friend realized that he was asleep on the railway tracks and pulled him off the railway tracks. And so this is a prayer to this saint, because Mexico is a very Catholic country, and 50% of the population is poor, lives under the poverty level. So this is more the type of artwork that you would get from the people who are more native, indigenous people, and the people that are more, well, poorer, basically. So these are other examples of ex votos, and I was very interested in them. And as you can see, they have certain elements. Here, there's Jesus. Here, there's the Virgin. Here, there's a lucha. There's a wrestler called El Santo. And this ex voto is something about aliens coming to visit and how the Santo will help protect them. So I was very interested in this art form. And I was working at BBDO, and we came up with an advertising campaign for an antibiotic. And the advertising campaign was directed at doctors. And it was to convince doctors to prescribe this antibiotic. And it was a Friday afternoon, and the meeting was Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And I, as a creative director, I used to have boccetistas, or I would have storyboard artists who were on my staff, and I would come up with the idea as an art director, and then I would ask them to visualize it for me. But they had all left for the day by the time we'd come up with this campaign. So I was like, oh, well, I'm going to do the layout. So I painted this. I painted this one here, and another one. And so we could show the client on the Monday morning. And it was the first time that I had done an ex voto, and I really enjoyed the experience. So we presented this campaign, and the clients liked it, and we ended up using my layouts actually for the campaign. We didn't hire the artists because the client was very happy with what I had done. But remember, I'm an art director. I would hire illustrators to do the work for me once I had sold the layout. But in this case, like I said, the client had decided to use my drawings. I didn't get paid extra money for it, by the way. So once I'd done that, I started to paint my observations about things that I experienced. And this was one about corruption. So in Mexico, if you went through a traffic light, a policeman would stop your car, and then they would ask for a mordida, or they would ask for a fine that you would pay to them. They wouldn't give you receipts. They would just ask for the money, or they would impound your car, or they would threaten to impound your car, or they would take your driver's license, and then you'd have to go to the police station to pick it up. So usually the custom was to pay them the money they were asking. So I decided to do sort of my observations as ex votos. And here I did this ex voto, and it was to the Virgin, and I didn't put her here. I decided to put her in the mirror. And it's just, this is a prayer saying, thank you, Virgin, for helping me when I went through a traffic light. And, the policeman asked me for a fine, but I understand that this is the Mexican culture. And so I paid him, because the policemen have to pay for their bullets. So the policemen have guns. They're very badly paid in Mexico, and not very well educated, because educated people work in business, and people who don't have much education would have roles like policemen. So they would have to buy their bullets for their guns. So that was sort of the situation they were in. Then I was asked, when I used to work at Ogilvy Advertising, they asked me to do advertising for a skin whitener. And that bothered me. And I told them I didn't agree. And I said it was racist to ask Mexicans to convince them that having lighter skin was better. So I ended up painting this ex voto about my experience. And the way I did it was having a morena, or a Mexican who has darker skin. She's looking at herself in the mirror and she's writing to the Virgin. In Mexico, there's the Virgin de Guadalupe. She is, because in different cultures, like in Portugal, they have the Virgin of Fatima. And in other cultures, they have different virgins who have appeared in the Catholic Church. And in Mexico, a dark-skinned virgin appeared, and her name is the Virgen de Guadalupe, or the Guadalupe Virgin. And so this woman here is writing up to her saying, I have dark skin and you have dark skin. So, you know, I bought this skin whitener and I feel guilty about lightening my skin. Please help me with this decision, Virgin. Then I did another one, which was about in Mexico, because Mexico is two cultures. There was the indigenous people who were here 500 years ago. Then the Spanish came and conquered Mexico. And the two cultures mixed, the two races mixed. And 80% of Mexicans are mixed blood, like this guy here. And 10% are white or European. And then 10% are indigenous blood or indigenous people. And so you have families where you'll have one brother who has blonde hair, blue eyes, and then the other brother is dark-skinned and dark eyes and dark hair. And one thing that was interesting is that when you would go to a disco, they would always have the cadena, or the rope, the velvet rope. And in my experience with the brothers that I had as friends, the blonde brother would have no issues getting in, and the brother with darker skin would have issues trying to get into the club, even though we were both from the same family. So I decided to do an ex voto about that. And there you can see the Virgin. And this is from one brother, this brother actually, writing to the Virgin, just talking about his situation, about how his brother, who is European looking, can get into bars, and then this guy can't. Then the Dalai Lama came to Mexico. I did his advertising campaign, and I decided to do an ex voto sort of about that, about these two great religions, Catholicism and Buddhism, coming together in the Mexican country. And again, you know, if you notice, the way I do things is I have different signs. So here there's Diego Rivera, and he would, a very Mexican famous painter, and he would always paint indigenous women with lilies, for example. Then we have the Virgin, but I did her as being held as a banner. And then we have the Dalai Lama there on the stage. And then, of course, I put myself there. The only time I've ever done that, just because I worked on his campaign. Then I did this. This may offend some people, and I'm sorry if it does. But in my observations, the Spanish came to Mexico and imposed the Catholic religion and took away the Aztec or the Mayan religions. And the Catholic priest said that those religions were wrong and they should all become Catholic. And so, and this picture, this ex voto, says basically, how much do you love Jesus, or how do you love Jesus? And I have a guy wearing a wrestling mask, somebody spying on him, and then him sort of looking at this white person, this person with dark skin looking at this white person, which what you will find in religion, Jesus has become white and saints are white, and then most Mexicans are darker skinned. And this is sort of a way, in my research, I found out of how they used visual communication to impose the idea of white superiority on Mexicans. So that's sort of what I was painting in this. Then just general, they used to say in Mexico, when you eat tacos off the street, that the meat was not from cows or sheep, but it was dogs that were lost on the street. So I thought that was kind of funny. So I did this ex voto based on that. And then there's a thing called Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos, which you guys have seen. In Mexico, they use the skull a lot. And I remember when I went to visit Day of the Dead at a very famous place in Pátzcuaro, I was with my aunt from Ireland, and it was raining, and somehow we fell and we landed on a grave, and we were killing ourselves laughing. And then we realized that there was these people who were looking at us horrified because we were lying on the grave of their loved one. So I decided to turn that into an ex voto. Then this is comments about the Catholic Church and pedophilia. And that was happening a lot in Mexico, as it has in other countries. So I decided to sort of paint this ex voto with my observations about the Catholic Church and pedophilia. And then this was another piece that is not an ex voto, but there are shopping bags in Mexico that are made of plastic, and then they put on these sequined decals. So I took those two together and created this 2-meter high picture of the Virgin with 2 babies wearing wrestling masks, and they're called Hermanos de Leche. So basically, I created artwork based on my observations and experiences and what I'd heard from living in Mexico. And I had all this artwork in my house, and I wanted to exhibit it. So I went to galleries in Mexico City, and they didn't like it, and they didn't accept my work. But I really believed in my work. And the galleries said to me that they didn't want to show the work, one, because I was a foreigner painting negative observations about Mexico and I was insulting Mexico. So that's why they didn't want to show my work. So that made me think, how can I get my work shown in galleries in Mexico City? And what I ended up doing was saying, okay, so because I'm this foreigner, gringo, in Mexico painting negative observations, they don't want to show the work. But what happens if I was a young Mexican who painted these observations? Would the galleries accept that? So that was sort of the idea of why I created El Crayolas, because they wouldn't show work from Carl Jones. But when they were approached with the idea that it was painted by a 28-year-old poor Mexican and his observations of Mexico, the gallery said yes. So that was how I was able to do it. So I created a logotype and this painting of El Crayolas and a website, and I wrote a bibliography creating the history of El Crayolas and why he was called El Crayolas. I worked with a guy who was an editor for a magazine. He liked the idea that I'd come up with for the project, and he helped me write this biography that we were able to put, and I created a website called elcrayolas.com. And this is what the website looked like here. And I also created a Facebook page. But of course, El Crayolas didn't exist physically. So I hired an actor, and I was thinking of different people to do the role. And then I ended up working with a friend of mine who was also a junior art director who worked with me at the advertising agency BBDO. And this is him there. Sorry for the quality of the pictures. This was like in 2006, I think. And this was like the highest resolution of the cameras that we had then. But this is El Crayolas. So I had him dressed up, and he was in the gallery meeting the people. And then what I did was that the ex votos I scanned and I printed them on canvas and made them bigger. So they weren't small. I made them like a meter wide. And that was what was shown in the gallery in Mexico City. And these is the invitation. And then these are just pictures of the show. Then what I decided to do, because, a gallery show lasts 2 weeks, and I wanted something more permanent or to get more people to see this artwork. So I ended up adapting them And through my connections as an art director and creative director, there are sometimes empty billboards in Mexico City, and they have nothing on it because they're trying to sell space, but nobody had bought space. So I said, you know, can I put this on there? And the billboard people said yes. I just had to pay for the printing of the billboard, which was one big sheet, you know, that was printed. And then it was put up in Mexico City. This was in 2006, I think, the 5th of April. Then I did vallas, which is the Spanish word for street posters, and then bus stops. And I paid for the printing, but the media space was donated to me because the media companies they were new medias in Mexico, and they wanted to they needed to fill them, but also have the space there so that advertisers would buy. And luckily, I had this artwork, so I said, okay, let me print it, and then if you guys can put it up, and then when you sell the space to brands, then you take it down. And I did that for a few of the X photos that I'd done, and I sent everybody to the website elcrayolas.com that I created that then talked about El Crayolas and his story. So I was building up this narrative about this poor young Mexican guy who was painting his observations on Mexico. And these are what I had done, and I took pictures as evidence, of course. I just knew it was important. And then the press started writing about it. And the press, this was in Reforma, which was a big newspaper in Mexico City. And they had, you know, it was on like page 6 or 7 or something in the cultural section. And then art magazines started writing about it. And then MTV came calling, MTV Latino. So, and they wanted to speak to El Crayolas. So we arranged for El Crayolas, the actor, to meet them. And he talked about his work as if he had done it. And I'm just going to show you, it's in Spanish. It's not very long, but at least you can see the actor and just see how he's interacting with the...
Seguimos acá en el hueveo con Crayolas y oye, tú hablas bastante del tema del racismo, ¿no? En tus pinturas y tú cómo lo tomas, si has ido a Canadá, a otros países que son como distinta raza, digamos. ¿Cómo tomas eso?
Pues yo nada más, lo único que he visto y obviamente lo que veo es lo que pinto, son las diferencias que hay, por ejemplo, en la tez.
Okay. So there you saw El Crayola. So he did exist and he was getting exposure in the media. Then I ended up doing more artwork. This one was exploring the idea of the Virgin and the Guadalupe. And I did sort of explorations in painting. And here's mixed media with neon with painting. These are like 2 meters tall. And this is the Virgin as an Aztec goddess. Actually, she did exist as an Aztec goddess. The Spanish came and eliminated anything that represented her. She was Mother Earth. There were written things about her. So I ended up reproducing what was written about her, and then did a show just sort of showing how she was when she was Tonantzin and how she morphed into the Virgin de Guadalupe. And then this is a 21st century version of her. And of course, I was exploring the idea of, because I argue that her image was created for the Catholic Church. So if Botero, who is a very famous Colombian artist, if he was the guy in charge of creating her image, then she would look this way. If this Virgin was created in Africa, then maybe she would look this way. And if she was created in Greece, then maybe she would look this way, because they valued the human form there. And this was the logo type, and just the name of the show. It was called El Show de Tona y Lupe, or the Tonantzin and Guadalupe Show. And then the press came, so the biggest TV network in Mexico came. And there.
Porque además es tradicional por época. ¿Cómo se
Blando.
¿Y ahora cómo los viste?
¿Cómo era la inauguración de una exposición de un pintor? Muchas veces nos invita a la reflexión.
¿Estarán viendo la pintura o nada más estarán ligando?
Anyway, so I'm just showing you that to show you that they were there opening night and reporting on El Crayolas and his work. Then, of course, more press wrote about it and about his work and analyzed his work and interviewed him. So they would meet him. I was the way we described it is that I met him in a market and I was helping him exposing his work through billboards and stuff, but he was the artist creating the work. And that was the story. This is El Crayolas in front of his work. And then we did poster wildings. So we printed up 3,000 posters of his stuff and then put them up at different tube stations in Mexico City and at the largest university in Latin America called UNAM. So anyway, we recorded everything. I think it's very important to document the work. And then the English language press started writing about El Crayolas and his work. Then magazines started doing spreads and were taking his imagery from the ex-votos and then wrote his life story and just why he did what he did, which I think looked great. And these were in magazines that were sold across Mexico. They were political magazines or cultural magazines. This is a political magazine called MX, and they came to El Crayola's studio. And then this is another piece of artwork that El Crayolas did, which was a neon piece. And the Mexican government even asked permission to use his work for a website that they had created. And the website was to teach people how to speak Spanish. So because remember, Mexico is indigenous people. I think there are 50 or 60 different languages spoken here. So the indigenous people have to learn Spanish in order to interact with people outside their area. And so the government had created these websites and these courses so that they could learn the Spanish language. And they used El Crayola's images in the background. They're kind of like karaoke videos. And then Canal Univision, which is the Spanish language channel in America. They sent their news crew down to Mexico to interview El Crayolas for the US market. So basically, over many years, El Crayolas had different shows in Mexico City. In Canada, he even showed, and in different locations around Mexico, like in Puebla and Cholula. And these are images of the different invitations that were done for his shows and then El Crayolas through the years. And then this is one with me and him together. And then, of course, the press came and they started reporting on what he did. So in 2010, remember this project started in 2005. I moved, sorry, my spelling mistake. I moved to work as Vice President Creative Director of Grey Canada, and Juan, who was the El Crayolas actor, moved to New York to learn how to be a DJ. So I thought, well, then the El Crayolas project is finishing because I don't know when I'm coming back to Mexico, and Juan didn't know whether he would come back to Mexico. So what I ended up doing was I decided to kill him off. And I decided to kill him off by actually creating his death. So I hired makeup artists from horror movies in Mexico. They work in Mexico, and they made it look like he had been shot in the face. So this is all fake, of course. This is special effects artists, and they did makeup to show El Crayolas as if he'd been shot in the face. And then I hired a photographer, and we did these pictures of his death. So pretty gory, I know, pretty realistic, but these are people that work in horror movies, so they know how to make things look good. This is not a real person, this is fake. And this is me taking the picture of El Crayola. So I hired a photographer, but also I wanted my own documentary evidence of what I had done. And then I went to a magazine in Mexico called Alarma. And the Revista Alarma is a magazine that features pictures of dead people. And it's very weird, but in Mexico, it's very popular, that type of thing. Death, remember, they have Day of the Dead, and the way Mexicans see death is different than the way other cultures see death. So I went to the owner and I explained my project, and would he be interested in publishing the pictures I had taken of El Crayola's death. And this is a cover of El Crayola, sorry. And these are the types of, this is what the magazine looks like. So on July 13th, 2013, El Crayolas was dead, and it was announced in the magazine Alarma. So they wrote an article because Alarma would show real deaths, but they had a section where it was more commentary. So there was a guy called Juan Carlos Aguilar, and he wrote about the death of this young artist in Mexico and published the death. And these are just screenshots of the actual article that was published in the magazine and on their website. And this is what it looked like on their website. So, and again, it was recorded in the press. So if you look at what I've been doing, one of my objectives was to get people aware of the work and aware of the messaging, whether it was racism or corruption. And I wanted that was my way of getting the story of El Crayolas and his observations on corruption and racism in Mexico out to the general public, because I don't think having an art show, you know, the people that go to art shows is not the wide population. And I wanted to reach the general public in Mexico. And I was able to do that with the death of El Crayolas too, which also sent people to his website, which, remember, I created many years earlier. Then what I decided to do was put it all in a book, and I self-published this book on blurb.com, blurb, B-L-U-R-B, and you can self-publish. So I was able to put together this book as a record of El Crayola's work, and I had to do an artist statement. So let me just read to you how I justified the artwork that I'd done. And remember, everything was organic. So what I say here is what I said in 2013. If you had asked me why I was doing El Crayolas in 2005, I would have said something different. So this is what I said. The artist Carl W. Jones asks, is contemporary art authentic or a manufactured commodity product sold to an ill-informed capitalist consumer? In 2005, to answer this question, Jones appropriated advertising contemporary art tools and techniques to create an artistic product titled El Crayolas. This brand was circulated throughout the contemporary art world via art exhibits, billboards, street posters, magazines, and newspaper articles. The objective was to make the artistic product real and authentic by creating content that was appropriated by the meta media and broadcast to the masses during the last 9 years. These published messages have now become the art. Communication theorist Marshall McLuhan stated, "The medium is the message." Therefore, in this exhibition, the original messages are presented in the exact medium in which they were first published. The El Crayolas project demonstrates that artists in the 21st century are not made of genius, but are a commodity product created by a consort of curators, critics, gallery owners, journalists, marketeers, and public relations using the metamedia. And then this is the translation in Spanish. then, so I was putting together an art show of the news articles, and this is just, I had taken a sabbatical, so I had left BBDO, and I had taken time off to do the El Crayolas project. My objective of the El Crayolas project was to create conversation in Mexico. So let me talk about the art show now. So what I did was, I knew I wanted to exhibit the El Crayolas work, but what I wanted to exhibit was not the paintings, because I'd already done that for 9 years. What I wanted to exhibit was the newspaper articles, because for me, that was the art, not the paintings. The paintings were the way to get to the newspaper articles. So I looked at different exhibits in Canada and Mexico and the UK, because I was traveling. I traveled between those 3 countries because of work and family. And there was this exhibition, and I thought it was very interesting the way they had the ad. This is a magazine cover, Adbusters, and they had put it in they sandwiched it between 2 pieces of plastic, and I thought that was kind of cool. And this was another exhibit I went to about advertising, and they had encased the ad in a white border and then covered it in plastic. Then I went to the David Bowie exhibit that was at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and I thought it was interesting the way they were showing this was the cover of some magazine. And then also in the David Bowie exhibit, they had used, so when he was interviewed on a TV program in Britain, they used an old television and showed the interview, not digitized, but they showed it on the videotape and on the TV screen from when that interview was done. So I thought all those learnings were neat. And then I saw this contemporary art exhibit, and I thought, again, it was neat the way they had this plastic and the way they had hung it from the ceiling. So all those things together helped inform me and let me know how to put my exhibit together. And then I also looked at the way, I can't remember the English word, but in Spanish it's fichas, or the way these, next to paintings where they give the name of the painting, the size, and then just a description. So I looked at the typography as well as those. This was the Damien Hirst exhibit at a gallery in London, and the way they described it. So when I came back to Mexico, I hired an industrial designer, actually, and he was able to find a way of putting together 2 pieces of plastic, putting the newspaper articles in there, and then a way to hang them up from a ceiling. And then this is the exhibition space. And of course, what's a gallery without a cat walking all over your artwork? This is me laying out the artwork. I didn't want to put it on walls. I wanted it to be hanging from the ceiling, so that I would use 100% of the space in the gallery. So here the assistants are putting the artwork up, hanging it from the ceiling. This is an example of how it looked. And then I had to go actually to the markets and look for televisions that were not digital that would play VCR tapes. So I had to buy TVs, it was so weird. Upgrading all my TVs to digital. And then here I am looking for TVs that were old school and analog. And this is the cover of the Alarma magazine that they published The Death of El Crayolas in. So this is how I exhibited the interviews that I showed you of El Crayolas, because they were shown and filmed when the world was analog, not digital. And then this is how the exhibition looked. And then the description of each individual artwork I put on the floor underneath the paintings, or sorry, the newspaper articles. I call them paintings because I think they're artwork. They were artwork to me. So they were put on stencils, not stencils, but I can't remember the word. They're like plastic, and they're adhesive plastic, and you can put them on the floor. And this is an example of what they look like and the typefaces that I used. And then the computer, because remember I had said that El Crayola's death was on the internet, on the website. And then he had a blog. So people at the web page of El Crayola's could go there and then write comments about his artwork. They were all positive. There was 2% negative. Most Mexicans supported what he was saying. And then this was the exhibition in 2013 of August. Excuse me. And then this was the invitation. Luckily, this gallery was supported by the Mexican government. So we had people that were sponsoring the exhibit at La Quiñonera, which is the name of the gallery in Mexico City in Coyoacán. Coyoacán is where Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera lived. That's where their house was. And then these are just sort of pictures of the show that was over 2 weeks. And then I made sure I documented everything. So people that came to the exhibition on the opening night, I interviewed them. And so we could get their opinions on the show. So I have that. I haven't done anything with it. I just have all that recorded. And then I invited the press. So there's a left-wing paper similar to The Guardian in the UK. And this paper is called La Jornada. Javier, you will know of that newspaper, and it's in Mexico City. So she interviewed me in Mexico City. And then the next day on page 2 and 3 of the newspaper, so imagine The Guardian and being on page 2 or 3, and they announced that they were interviewing me. So these are the 2 pages that I was on, page 2 and 3. And the title was, I Killed El Crayolas. And then it was the story of El Crayolas and how the art exhibit was criticizing about how artists in the contemporary art world are now manufactured, like Banksy. Banksy is a guy who is being manufactured. I fully believe that Banksy comes from an advertising background because he uses advertising techniques to get his messaging out. Remember that I created my project in 2005 before I'd even heard of Banksy. But my objective, again, was to talk about how art world is run by curators and marketeers who sort of create this fake brand and then can sell paintings for an exorbitant amount of money. And I was trying to prove that you could create a brand and from zero. And that's what I was doing with my project. And then French TV came and interviewed me, and it was very interesting the way the press reacted. And again, people always ask me, did people react negatively? Were Mexicans pissed off because you had lied? And no, Mexicans laugh when they hear the story of El Crayolas. They think it's very funny. Very rarely have I met people who were angry at the project that I had created. So that's the El Crayolas project from 2006 to 2013. And remember that El Crayolas I created before I became an academic. So once I became an academic, I started to reflect and analyze my artwork, but through a theorist lens, because I didn't have those theories when I created El Crayolas. I was trained as an art director, and I did and used advertising and graphic design theory, and a lot of things I did because it was natural to me and it felt right. But until I learned the theories, they helped me understand why I did what I did, basically. And one of the things I learned when I became an academic and when I did my master's was semiotics. And I wrote this paper on, can semiotics be used to encode a personal brand by appropriating advertising tools and techniques? And I had done a paper and presented it in Bulgaria at the Semiotic 12th World Congress. And what I had done is I had analyzed the Mr. Clean brand. In Britain, Mr. Clean is called Flash, and it doesn't have a bald man. But in the rest of the world, Procter & Gamble sells Flash under the name Mr. Clean or Monsieur Propre in France and Quebec, and Maestro Limpio in the Spanish-speaking world in Latin America and Spain. And I dissected Mr. Clean and looked at how that brand was created using brand name, brand character, typography, logo, textuality, hero, narrative, mnemonic devices, and illustration. And I applied that research to the El Crayolas brand. So what I looked at was how I encode and decoded. So I looked at the brand name that I did of El Crayolas, and I did the brand name and the brand character through the website and the Facebook page. Then I looked at brand typography. You know, Mr. Clean had a certain typography, and I had done that naturally for El Crayolas. I didn't question why I had done it. I just knew that that's what you needed to do. Then I needed an image for El Crayolas, so I did this painting of him that then became his icon. Then the brand logo, of course, was the visual of El Crayolas plus the typography, similar to Mr. Clean, where there was an image and then the word El Crayolas underneath. And of course, remember, when I created this of El Crayolas was way before I had studied semiotics and studied Mr. Clean, even though I had done advertising for Mr. Clean in Mexico in 1993. Then I did the brand voice, and this is examples of the social media post that El Crayolas did on his Facebook page. Then there's the brand narrative, and that was done through the social media pages and him getting in the press. Then I looked at encoding. So I was examining what I had learned from the ex voto paintings that I showed you at the beginning of this lecture, and the images that I had done originally of El Crayolas. So I analyzed it, and what I looked at were signs in ex votos. And ex votos paintings all have either they have a virgin, they have the saint, or they have a Jesus. So there's always like something that the people are praying to. Then the skin color or the tone of the people in the ex votos, the eye color of the people in the ex votos. There are often candles. The typography is always hand drawn. The writing has a lot of spelling errors, because remember I told you that the people that do ex votos are usually people that are in the lower classes or people that are poor. So that usually means they haven't been educated very well. So when they write the ex votos, there are spelling mistakes and grammatical mistakes. They use bright colors, and the painting style is very naive or folk art. So then I looked at the codes. So the first thing I just showed you were the signs, right? Which is the smallest unit of meaning in semiotic theory. Then I looked at the codes. So then I looked at the codes that appeared in ex votos. And the codes that I saw by analyzing ex votos were that authority can be corrupt. The Virgin de Guadalupe, she's Mexican. Life is easier for people who have a lighter skin tone. Mexican humor is sarcastic. Religious icons will help me if I pray. Mexican family members can have different skin colors, and Mexico has a class system. Those are sort of things I took from looking at different ex votos. Then emergent codes. What an emergent code is a new trend that's happening. And so what the trends that I noticed in ex votos were that I can do anything I want, seek new ways of doing things, searching for identity. Mexico can change. I can challenge authority through humor, and Mexican tradition is cool. So then I took these and applied them to my ex votos, and that is sort of helped explain why I did what I did and the decisions that I'd made. And again, remember, when I did these, I didn't have theory, but I did make decisions. And when I, again, did a critical analysis of what I had done, I came to this conclusion here that I'm showing you, that these types of ideas were reflected in my artwork, because I did study ex votos before I did these pictures, but I didn't have the knowledge of semiotics and the idea of signs, codes, and emergent codes, but I'd done it naturally because as I'm an art director, right? So that's sort of part of my training. And then this is sort of the end result. So then I analyzed the signs in my painting. So the Virgin de Guadalupe, I had a morena, I had the jewelry cross, which was here. And then the skin whitener, the candle, the typography, and the narrative were the signs. The codes were life is easier for people who have lighter skin tone. Mexican humor is sarcastic. Religious icons will help me if I pray. And the Virgin Guadalupe is Mexican. And then the emergent code, the new trend that I was seeing was searching for identity. So I applied, sorry, I'm just showing you then now all the different codes and signs that I had done in my pictures without realizing it. So let me go back to building a brand, right? So then mnemonic devices. And what a mnemonic device is in advertising, when you see a TV commercial, like for McDonald's, and at the end of the commercials, they have da, 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 and it's something that you remember, that you associate with the brand. So I had created these mnemonic devices for El Crayolas. Then I made El Crayolas a hero. And I did that by him being interviewed by the press. They helped me create this narrative of him being a hero, him being interviewed on MTV, and him challenging racism and corruption in Mexico. Then how did I do brand awareness? Well, the art shows and, of course, the billboards and the website all help build that narrative. And then, of course, the press reporting on him. So that was how I got awareness. So in that paper that Javier had mentioned that quite a few of you have read, I demonstrate how I created the brand El Crayolas using advertising tools and techniques. And this is what I had done. So the conclusion of this part, I have a little thing I want to talk about after El Crayolas. But the conclusion for the El Crayolas project was that it was a performance art exploration that challenges identity and self and asks why and how fabricated messages broadcast on mass media can become the truth. And questions to ask myself after I'd done my research and sort of critical analysis: does McLuhan's "the medium is the message" theory affect the interpretation of codes and signs encoded into branded messages? Also, how does an emergent code begin? When do these trends start happening? How can target markets be investigated to discover more defined emergent codes? Or how can you look at target markets and see what are the trends that are happening? And what other design methods can be used to encode signs, codes, emergent codes into branded messages? So what I believe is that as an art director, an artist, an illustrator, if you do your research, you can look for signs that then you can then put into your artwork to appeal to the target market and that reflect the brand that you are advertising. And I like exploring that. So if you have any questions, please write them down. Let me just talk quickly about this last part of my project. I believe in art through research, and that is the method that I'm using to research my PhD at the Royal College of Art. And I did this project that I'm showing you here called Interrogating Democracy in the Digital Gaze. And I was very interested in the gaze. The gaze is the point of view. You know, when you look at a TV commercial or a photograph, it shows a point of view. So there was a woman called, oh my God, what's her name? I'll remember it in a few minutes. A British, Laura Mulvey. And she wrote about the male gaze. And it was based on movies and TV shows and commercials done in the 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. And she said, the gaze, when you see a movie and the camera shows the woman body, or the camera focuses on the woman's breasts or on her bum, it's from a male point of view. And even though a woman's watching the movie, she's forced to look at things through a man's point of view. So I took that theory and I wanted to examine the digital world and to look at the digital gaze. And I wanted to look at Google. And, you know, when we look at Google through a computer screen, it's code. And it is code that has been written by white men in California. And they force us to look at information through the programmed software that they have done. So I wanted to explore that. Then I looked at theories like Marshall McLuhan, and he wrote a theory about electronic devices as an extension of man. And he said, all media are extensions of some human faculty, psychic or physical. The wheel is an extension of the foot. The book is an extension of the eye, clothing an extension of the skin, electric circuitry an extension of the central nervous system. So I was looking at the mobile phone as an extension of the eye and the brain, and it's a mechanical device. Then I also looked at the theories of a guy called Edward Bernays. Now, he was the nephew of Sigmund Freud. And in the early part of the last century, in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, he was in charge of, by the US government, of propaganda and mass control. How do you control the masses? Through capitalism and consumerism. And he said, if we understand the mechanism and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without them knowing it. So it's talking about how to control people without them knowing they're being controlled. And that is what the mass media does right now and has done since then. So there's a story that I found in the press about how the Russians, you know, how the Americans have accused the Russians of being involved in Brexit and also in the election of Donald Trump. And there was a story about the Russians spreading fake plot to assassinate Boris Johnson on social media. So I just had that as an example of how the mass media can be manipulated to put ideas in people's heads without them knowing. And of course, now we have things like misinformation and fake news. Then I looked at the power and the gaze. And there's a great theorist called Michel Foucault. And he took the idea of the panopticon gaze. There was a British architect called Jeremy Bentham, I think, or Bentley, and he designed an ideal prison. And the idea was to put the guards in this tower and have all the prisoners in the cells. So you could have one guard looking at every prisoner. And the prisoners, the theory was that the prisoners would behave well because they didn't know when they were being looked at. And what Michel Foucault was talking about, this idea of the power and the gaze. And I took that theory, and you can apply it to the digital world. And Britain is one of the most surveyed nations under close camera circuit, close camera TV, where we have cameras in the streets, in stores, everywhere we go. So I sort of looked at that idea of when you're on, Facebook, and you know that you can't say certain things because your friends will challenge you or report you. And that sort of keeps you behaving well. And that's sort of the theory of the power and the gaze. So I looked at those theories. Then I had a research method, because remember I was looking at Google. And I thought, well, I like art. And what is the most common thing in art? Well, it's the naked human body, or the nude. So I thought I'd explore the word nude using Google. And I'm just warning you now that there's some pictures of naked people. So if you're offended by that, then maybe you just look away from the screen for the next 5 minutes. So what my research method was, number one, was that I selected 7 languages from around the world. So I looked at Swahili, I looked at Chinese, I looked at Russian, I looked at English, I looked at Spanish, I looked at Hindu. And then I put the word nude in Google Translate to interpret the word from English nude to the first word that appears as a translation. So this is me using Google Translate. So I put the word nude, and then what appeared was this translation here. And remember, this is Google, and this is software written by people in Southern California. So then I took this word, and then I would use a VPN and hide my address, and I went to Saudi Arabia, and then it was as if my laptop was in Saudi Arabia, and then I put the first word that came into Google search. So this is the first word that came up as the interpretation of the word nude. And then this is what appeared. And I took the first 300 images, and collected them. So this was the first one, and then it went down to 300. And then I put them together in a video. And I did that process for 7 other cultures. Like I said, for India, Hindu, I used Chinese, but I ended up, because of China firewall, I couldn't get in there. So I used Hong Kong. Then I did Russia. Then I did Canada to represent the English-speaking world, because it's in Canada at that point. Then Mexico to represent the Spanish language world. And I did a video. And I put those videos on Vimeo. And I have one video for each of the different languages. So this was Tanzanian, and this is in Tanzania, in Swahili, sorry. So we're not going to see all the images, but I just wanted to sort of show you what I had done, and then just what happens with the word nude when it's translated into Swahili using Google. And then you go to Tanzania and then put it into Tanzanian Google and what appears. And then this was Saudi Arabia. This was China. Sorry, this was China. And then this was Mexico, which is mostly naked male men. The reason that happened was because when you translate the word nude into Spanish, there are 2 senses. There's the feminine version of the word, and then there's the masculine version. And because the word was translated into desnudo, it meant male. So that's why you have these pictures of men, whereas in the other countries, they're mostly females. So that led to me ask the question, is the digital gaze a white, Western, heterosexual male gaze promoted through free software? And that's what I explored in a paper. And if you're interested, just ask Javier and I can give you the link where you can read the paper of how I do art through research. So again, my process was to look at theory, analyze theory, and then that informed my artwork. And then the artwork is the result of my research. So that's why I call it art through research. So the conclusion of today's presentation, and I'm just, well, I'm sorry that I'm 50 minutes over, but I'll finish now. So my conclusion is that as an artist, I find it hard to express or justify my thinking. You know, as an art director, I'd be in meetings with big marketing executives, and I would have to explain my ads and my layouts and how I was, my branding. And I would find it very, very hard, because I think as a visual communicator, we do things naturally. Like when somebody is a copywriter, they actually have to think of words, and when they're writing the words, and they go through a different thought process than artists do. So what I realized was that studying theory helped improve or made stronger my creative output, because then I could justify why I did what I did. So instead of me just saying I did an ex voto and I talk about racism in it, I can explain all those different signs and codes that I put in there, and I can justify them because I've identified them and thought about them and deliberately put them in there and made a decision. And then it's easier to explain to your clients why you did what you did, and you have a theoretical background. So I definitely think theory has helped me express and justify the decisions I make, the visual decisions that I make. And that's basically sort of what I wanted you guys to sort of take away and from my lecture and the work that I've done. So I'm on Twitter, so you can follow me at CarlWJUKMX1, or I have a website, which is carlwjones.com. If you're interested in looking more at the work that I've done and my advertising work, because I really haven't shown you what I've done in advertising. But hopefully this has been enjoyable and makes sense to you. And now I can open it up for questions. And Javier, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's been a great pleasure. And I love talking about this project, and I don't get to do it enough. So thanks for giving me the opportunity.
No, thank you for attending. It was super cool. Yes, now I got a little bit of a homesickness. Very good. Yes, so now.
Carl Jones, Senior Lecturer in PR and Advertising at the University of Westminster.
Then you're showing an idealized world, and this is what life could be like if you buy this product and bring it home.